6 Eastern Time. Welcome to Two Way, whether you're watching on YouTube or here on the Two Way platform. Very glad for you to be here and love for you to participate. We're going to talk about a couple things tonight. First, I'm going to give you my latest reporting on where the race, Harris versus Trump, stands in the wake of the debate and in the midst of a new debate about debates. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about the new film Centered, a documentary about one of the finest people I ever met, Senator Joe Lieberman, who recently passed away. And for those of us who miss him, this documentary is both a treasure and a pleasure, and also a little bit difficult to watch for reasons we'll discuss. But we have three great people joining us who knew Senator Lieberman quite well. We're going to look at a little bit of the film. We're going to talk about it and about the meaning of his life and reflections on why he is so important to everyone he touched, but also an important figure in modern American history. So we'll get to the film in a minute. We'll get to all your questions. If you'd like to be part of the discussion, you'll be able to raise your hand if you're here on the Two Way platform and be part of it. As always, particularly tonight, to honor Senator Lieberman, who always believed in extending the presumption of grace and in civility. Please, if you feel like you want to comment in the chat, either on YouTube or here on Two Way, please try to be cognizant of what we represent, which is peace, love, and understanding, not negativity. Speaking of negativity, as I spent my day reporting on what's going on in the race, particularly in the battleground states and the undecided voters in the presidential race, I talked to a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans, some at the presidential level, some working on down ballot races, some strategists, people familiar with polling data, with focus groups, and people with common sense about politics. And I'm certain that what I say tonight is going to cause some people, it's already started, to say, I'm an apologist for Trump, I'm being spun by Mar-a-Lago, I'm making things up, I'm ignoring the facts. And I'm just here to tell you, I'm only going to give you facts. And I'm going to give you theories based on facts, which may or may not be true. But if you're someone who thinks along the lines of George Conway or Stuart Stevens, that we're always just one covfefe away from the end of Donald Trump, that he's doomed because he attacked the Pope or he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, I'm here to tell you the most important thing is I didn't talk to a single person today, including any Democratic strategist, who believe that the debate is going to cause Kamala Harris to take a meaningful lead in the polls on a sustained basis or perhaps at all. So I'm here to try to consider two theories that are just dogma in the media and amongst Democrats. One is that independent swing voters, the undecided voters in the 7 states who will decide the election, reacted to the debate and how the two candidates did in the same way that MSNBC hosts reacted to it. That's one theory. The other theory is that Donald Trump, today saying he was not due another debate with Kamala Harris, reflects the fact that he knows he lost and he's afraid of doing another one. Okay? Those theories may be right. I'm not saying they're wrong. But what I am saying is, based on my conversations today, I think they might be wrong. And that would be wise to consider that they might be wrong, particularly if you're someone who doesn't want Donald Trump to win and made the mistake in 2016 and nearly in 2020 of assuming that Donald Trump didn't have any idea what he was doing and that he was going down to defeat because he's only supported by his core MAGA base. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. I'm not saying the people who hold the theories that are dominant in the media now are wrong. I'll say again, what I'm saying is they might be wrong. And what I'm saying is based on what I've heard today, I think there's a way to build that up. All right. So let's talk about that. Then we'll talk about the film. First, if you look at polls of the debate of who won, they're not of undecided voters. That'd be really expensive to do and really hard to do. They're of all voters. And what do we know about the difference between all voters and undecided voters? The undecided voters are a weird group in the sense that they're undecided for a reason. And I hear from people all the time who say, how could anyone be undecided? How could they not be able to pick between these two candidates? So if you really want to know how the undecided voters reacted to the debate, you'd have to poll undecided voters. And if you only wanted to poll undecided voters in the swing states, that's what you'd have to do. I don't know anyone who did that and made that public, number one. Number two, I've said this several times, make no mistake, Donald Trump did horribly in the debate. His capacity to fall for every bit of bait she put out there, I can accept the argument that that's disqualifying. Someone that undisciplined and that easily triggered shouldn't be controlling nuclear weapons. But that doesn't mean that that's the way undecided voters experienced it. The undecided voters, based on all the research and all the people I've talked to about them, they really want specifics. They don't know anything about Kamala Harris, really. They don't know that she'd be a good steward of a good economy. They don't know that she is ready to be commander in chief. They don't know what her ideas are to make college or homes more affordable. And I think you could see, based on what she said in the debate, on her New Hampshire speech, on her North Carolina speech, on her policy positions on the website, I think it's reasonable to say that that hasn't necessarily broken through to undecided voters in the battleground states. I think if you did a focus group or a big poll of undecided voters in the battleground states and made inquiries as to what they knew about Kamala Harris's plans to make their lives better, I don't know that they have much information on that, would be my guess. And so would it be surprising, given that there were no gladiatorial moments in the debate where she devastated Donald Trump? There were a series of moments where that happened, no doubt, but there's nothing iconic, nothing massive. It would be possible that the way those people experienced the debate itself, if they watched it, or coverage of the debate, was, I still don't really know much about what Kamala Harris would do to improve my life. And what did they experience about Donald Trump? He says dumb stuff. He's undisciplined. He's insulting. He wanders off message. That's not new data for them. It was an extraordinary performance, but it's not new data for them. What is new data for them in the negative is they still don't know much about what Kamala Harris would do. Now, defenders of Kamala Harris can cut and paste the transcript and send me the portions of the debate where you think she was so specific and so clear about what she would do for those voters that they now think, well, no, I understand what she's all about. So if that's right, and that's what Mar-a-Lago is arguing, don't get me wrong, but I'm not saying it's right because they're saying it, but I've talked to other research people and I've looked at data and information that leads me to believe that you shouldn't be surprised, which again, by the way, Wilmington will not be surprised if one of the most devastating debate takedowns of all time does not move the polls in the battleground states, because those voters who can move those polls didn't experience the debate the way Joy Reid did or Rachel Maddow did. Topic one. Topic two, why is Trump saying he won't do another debate? The theory, again, in George Conway's head is he's afraid. He won't admit he lost the first debate, but he doesn't want to risk doing another one. Washington Post reported this morning that Harris advisors are desperate, that they didn't use that word, but that was the tone of it, to get another debate because voters don't know enough about her views. They need to fill that in, and filling that in a debate, although I don't believe she did it particularly well as she did other things in the first debate, is best done in a debate because it's the biggest audience and it's the most focus on her. Can they do it through advertising? Sure. That's why they're talking about maybe doing what Barack Obama did, a hour or more block of primetime television to try to break through. People understand her ideas. As you know, she didn't do very much of that in the convention. They passed up that opportunity. They made the convention and her speech about bio, not about specific policy. So if you're Donald Trump and you believe the following things, maybe what he's doing today, maybe is leveraging his negotiating. If he thinks she wants another debate, and he doesn't want another debate on a network he doesn't think will be fair to him. As I tweeted this morning, if you go to a Chinese restaurant, you can expect to get Chinese food. If he agrees to do a debate on NBC or CBS, no matter who the moderators are, he might not get a different result than he got at ABC. I think he wants the debate on Fox. And maybe he thinks by playing hard to get now, because saying no today doesn't mean he has to say no tomorrow. Maybe he thinks she wants the debate more than I do because she wants the opportunity to convince voters what she's about. And so maybe he'll say, well, you really want to debate? Let's do it on Fox. I did a debate on ABC, a liberal network. Let's do one on Fox. Again, that could be wrong. He could be terrified. He could be refusing to do another debate because he thinks, oh my goodness, I'll do just as bad as I did before. Doesn't sound like the Donald Trump I've met, but maybe that's what's happening. Maybe the liberal theory is correct. But I think the other theory could be correct too, which means don't assume there's no debate. And don't assume he might not be probing to see, well, maybe I'll see how desperate she is. Maybe I can get a debate on Fox, but then maybe he does want another debate. And so in a week or day or 2 weeks, he could say, you know what? Yeah, let's do the NBC debate or the CBS debate. I'll say again, no one I talked to today thinks that the debate, as decisive as it was scored by any sane person, no one I talk to thinks it's going to dramatically change the polls at all, or certainly not in a sustained way in the battleground states. And I'll say again, don't interpret what the media thinks or what people in a poll think for what undecided voters think. Undecided voters are a different beast. They have different attitudes about these things. And what they want to know, particularly, is specifics on the economy. They know, some of them know, what the specifics for Donald Trump are on the economy because they experienced it starting in 2017. And at a minimum, inflation was lower and gas prices were lower. That may be all they think about. But at this point, even the Washington Post editorial board would tell you they don't know much about what Kamala Harris's actual economic policies are. And the undecided voters aren't paying as close attention as David Shipley and his colleagues are at the Washington Post. That is my view of where things stand right now. If we have time in the back half, I see some hands up. Maybe we'll talk about it. But we're going to shift now to talk about our main topic tonight, which is the new documentary Centered. And I want to bring in our three guests to help talk about it with me. And there are three people who every day, I'm sure, think about Senator Lieberman, work closely with him, and I couldn't be happier to have them here. So let's bring them in, please. And we'll introduce them and we'll talk about the film. And we're going to look at a little bit of it as well. All right. Very grateful to you all for making time. We'll start with the filmmaker, Mr. Gruber. Welcome. Unmute you. Tell everybody, Jonathan, tell everybody how you knew Senator Lieberman, and tell everybody where the film came from.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me on and talking about the film. We really appreciate it. I just defer to both Clarissa Nardi Riddle and Jim Kennedy. They have known or knew the senator much longer than I. I first interviewed him for a previous film I was doing on former Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. That was, I believe, in 2019, and it was just a very nice, cordial man. And a couple of years later, someone sent out an email apropos to nothing really, just telling this interesting story about how they were in the kitchen of a house in New Jersey during the Gore Lieberman campaign, helping to fundraise. And they were in the kitchen and listening to the Secret Service who was there. And they were talking about how wonderful Joe and Hadassah, Joe's wife, were. They were always making sure they were well fed and taken care of. Apparently, it was just a very special and unique relationship between the Secret Service and the senator. And something just clicked. And I thought, that's a great story within a much bigger story. And at the time, it was 2021. Politics just kind of seemed like it was going off the rails. People were the opposite of what Senator Lieberman was, which is, he could disagree without being disagreeable. He was working with people on all sides, and it just felt to me like really a desperate time to tell his story. And it's really unfortunate that he passed just 6 days before he died. We had sent him a cut of what we thought was, pretty much the final version of the film. And he wrote back and emailed me and said, I love the film. It's a great legacy to my public service. Even though he knew, and he said, when we talked about the different things we were going to talk about, he said, I know it's not going to be all hugs and kisses. And, even though you had said very kindly, it's a pleasure and a treasure, but there are, we're talking about all kinds of things with Senator Lieberman. I think that's an important part of who he was. So.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. All right, Clarissa Nardi Riddle. I don't want to slight Senator Lieberman's other aides and advisors he worked with, but you're first among equals in working with him for such a long time in Connecticut. And then did you immediately succeed him as Attorney General?
Well, when he beat Lowell Weicker, the law of Connecticut was that the governor gets to fill the replacement because he had 2 years left on his term. So it was a funny situation where I was his chief deputy. And in Connecticut, you had to have been practicing as a lawyer for 10 years. And I had 9 years and 6 months or something. And so the governor said to me, I'd really like to appoint you Attorney General and then swear you in when you're qualified, as long as you agree not to run, because he wanted to keep it as an open seat to fight for in a primary. And of course, I was flattered. And so I was appointed by Governor Bill O'Neill, who has since passed too.
Yeah. So succeeded him, and then served as his top aide in the Senate. And then after he left public life, you went with him to the law firm and had worked with him for so many years. So honored to have you here. And Jim Kennedy, who first on his resume now is regular attendee at two-way episodes, also was Senator Lieberman's communications director. Did you do his campaigns and Senate, or just Senate?
I started with him in his first campaign for Congress in 1980, way back then. And then I worked on his campaign for AG and then joined him in the AG office and then went to the Senate. So I was sort of an informal advisor to the campaigns, except for the one in 81, 82 when he ran for AG, which I worked on directly. And I also was able to help somewhat as a volunteer in 2000, because I was at that time I was Al Gore's communications director in the White House, but went on the campaign trail some and also worked on the recount battle along with him and Al Gore.
Yeah,
you were in charge of the military ballots, right?
Want to make sure those are counted.
Yeah. So I will just say, and I find it's difficult for anyone who knew Senator Lieberman to fully convey to those of you who didn't know him or only observed him casually. It's very difficult to explain how exceptional he was as a person, as a public servant, all the ways in which, I'm not saying there's no one else in public life who's sort of like him, but I never met, of all the public officials I ever met, I never met anyone exactly like him as a public official or as a person. Just an extraordinary person. The adjectives are too numerous to list here. But what I want to do first is I want to show you the trailer for the film to give you an idea about it. And then I'd like each of you to comment on the trailer, just to tell us what strikes you in the trailer, speaking to an audience. I'm sure there are people on here who know him. I know there are. But I'd like you to single out things from the trailer after we watch it that you think you want to highlight, to say to people, that's Joe Lieberman. That's what made Joe Lieberman special. So this is the trailer from the new documentary, Centered.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States of America, Joe Lieberman.
Gore needed to do something dramatic, something different. Lieberman checked all those boxes.
You want to know something? It's election day.
You believe you're president of the United States and vice president of the United States. And then
this recount is mandated by Florida law.
What can you do? You lose, you lose.
Everybody has defeats. You have to have the faith to get up off the ground and try the next thing. Throughout my career, I have been persistently, stubbornly bipartisan.
It was about how do we address the issue and help the American people.
He is not a cookie-cutter Democrat.
He was strong in defense.
The civilized world has often had to meet force with force,
but more liberal on social issues.
I welcome the president's support of a new Clean Air Act.
He was ahead of the curve on the environment, on gun control.
I'm here because country matters more than party.
Joe and John came together to help form the 9/11 Commission. It was important for the country. It was important for bipartisanship. When Joe believed in something, he didn't hold back.
Repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell is the right thing to do.
Trying to bring diverse people together to get results.
Are we ready to fight?
That's the view that Joe Lieberman embodies.
Every time a barrier is broken, the doors of opportunity go wider for every single one of us.
All right, so I'm going to set the example of what I'm asking you three to do. I'll go first, and I hope I don't steal yours. Often it's said when people are talking about a senator or a public official, they're divided into categories: show horse or workhorse. Someone who gets actual things done, and versus somebody who is just entertaining on the public stage, who not just likes the limelight but understands how to use it. Senator Lieberman, as you saw that in the trailer, he was both. He totally understood as a man of faith, as a comedian, as a philosopher, as a student of human nature. He totally understood how to command the public spotlight. And although he didn't succeed in his presidential or vice presidential campaign, although he was part of the ticket that actually did win if all the votes were counted correctly, he was an extraordinary public presence. But as you saw there, just a hint of it with that fast exchange of quick cuts of legislative accomplishments, most of you are probably not familiar with just how many major pieces of legislation he was involved in at the high landmark level. For instance, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, something people said even in the wake of 9/11, cut across so many bureaucracies that it would be impossible to do. That's a super high profile, high level one. But and there's others at that level or close to it. But the second level down of very significant legislation in a bipartisan way during an increasingly partisan time. Again, can you name other people who were show horses and workhorses? Sure, but they'd be like Ted Kennedy and other people who are titans in American history in terms of getting things done. So that's what I would highlight there. Clarine, why don't you go next and say what strikes you about that?
Well, it just super personified his work ethic and his commitment to public service. I mean, he was guided by John Fitzgerald Kennedy's, ask not what you can do for your country, ask what you can do for your country. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. He was driven in that way. And, as the president of the Yale Daily News, he was constantly focused on what was important to the public, what was important to the media too, because he knew he needed that to work in favor of the change that he was wanting to bring about. And like you also say, Mark, he was always looking long-term, the bigger projects, clear to the end. He was a co-chair of the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. And I mean, who's going to spend their days weeding through all these biodefense reports and research and everything, but somebody like Joe Lieberman, who really cares about the future of the country. So yes, those slides all highlighted his drive, his courage, the fact that he would stick his neck out on things ahead of other people and say, I've got to do it. I just have to take a leadership role here.
Thank you. Jonathan.
We created it, the trailer, or Wheelhouse did a great job. I have to defer to Clarine and Jim in terms of, their experience. No, I would say one thing is that, what's amazing about Senator Lieberman is a sort of Zelig-like quality to sort of be there with either President Clinton or President Bush or President Obama or Senator McCain. And there he is. He's not in the background. He's shaking hands. He's hugging them. He's part of the, the legislation, part of the things that are important to this country. And you mentioned the word Titan. I think that, aside from presidents of this country, that there's very few political leaders over the last half century who had as much influence and very few that had as much grace as Senator Lieberman.
Yeah. Jim Kennedy.
Yeah, seeing the trailer of Jonathan's excellent film, I think hearing his voice again is like political comfort food to me. It's really reassuring to hear it again because he was a reassuring person. I think in 40 years of knowing him, I don't think I ever heard him really yell, either internally, inside or outside. He didn't have that kind of voice, and he was really bipartisan going way back. I think in 1980, that race for Congress, he kind of ran as a traditional Democrat, and that taught him a lesson not to be a traditional Democrat, I think. And thereafter, I think he was liberated to kind of call his own shots, which he continued to do as AG and in the Senate, et cetera. So I think that really was a liberating force, motivating him to be truly bipartisan, which was in his nature. It wasn't fake. It was something really true to him.
Yeah. To have known Senator Lieberman when he was alive is to miss him desperately now that he's passed. And every time I see a piece of video of him, and that trailer included, I just am sad for the country, obviously sad for his family, but sad for all of us, because again, even in retirement, he was not really retired. Let's take a look at another clip 5, folks. We'll tee that up. He did, of course, after serving in the after AG and after Senate, he did. It was on the national ticket. Then he ran for president, and then in retirement, he had all sorts of careers. And we'll take a little bit of look at a guy who's supposedly retired but working very hard.
Okay, I retired from the Senate, but I don't think I'll ever fully retire till I have to, physically or mentally.
He's so retired, right? Don't you think my dad's super retired?
We're still arguing about where did the COVID-19 pandemic begin and how.
He's been dedicated to public policy since he left the Senate.
国家副主席韩正12号在北京会见出席中美知名人士论坛第5次会议的美方代表。
Are we ready to fight for freedom in Iran until we win? Yes. Poser! This surprise attack Hamas first was shocking and proves, there'll be a time for this afterward about how they possibly could have done this.
So amongst the things that Senator Lieberman did in quote unquote retirement was to work, as I think was referenced already, for No Labels, the organization I worked with for a time. And there he did what he did throughout his career. He fought for the country, putting country over party, and was heavily involved in No Labels' effort to make sure that there was an insurance policy if the country faced a choice. And I think he was so steadfast in understanding, and had, for instance, Joe Biden chosen not to get off the ticket, had his course of decline go exactly as it had, and the country now we're faced with Trump versus Biden. Those who attack Senator Lieberman and No Labels for their efforts to have an insurance policy, I think would have looked quite foolish at this point. So I want to bring in former North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory, who worked with Senator Lieberman and Clarin at No Labels. And Governor, thank you for joining. I know you worked with him there and knew him. I'd love to hear just your reflections about Senator Lieberman and his quote unquote retirement years.
Well, Mark, first, thanks for doing this. And one of the greatest thrills I had in my 30 years of public service as a mayor and governor and city councilman was I got to meet and work with Joe Lieberman in his last 2 years. And as co-chair of No Labels, along with Ben Chavis, I've never had a relationship with two other people like Ben Chavis and Joe Lieberman, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. And I just want to thank his family and his other workers. And the thing that impressed me, he became a mentor immediately to me at my age. And I'd also like to emphasize, he wasn't afraid to step on the establishment.
Right.
And he took a lot of risk, and I saw him firsthand take a lot of heat from people who shouldn't have given him heat. And he gave me the courage to do the same thing to my own party and joining No Labels. And the way he was a gentle soul, but a gentle soul with such strength. And I've never met anyone who was a gentle soul with strength. As Mark said, I never saw him lose his temper, but he had this strength about him that I just feel fortunate that I got to know him, Mark. And he was right on No Labels, by the way. Yeah. And I don't know what he'd be thinking about today, Mark. It'd be interesting. But God bless you for doing this, Mark. And it was an honor to work with him.
Thank you. I've yet to cry on an episode of Two Way, but tonight's the night. And Governor, I can see, because I know you well enough to know how you're feeling as well watching this and talking about him. Fearless, okay? A man of faith helps to be fearless, a man of a sense of humor, a man of wisdom, a man of great intellect, fearless. And that's not something you say about too many people in public life. I want to bring. I want to ask Jonathan. I want to ask you a question. Tell people about the distribution of the film. If they want to watch it, what are their opportunities to watch it?
Sure. We just had a wonderful screening, a private screening at the Library of Congress on Tuesday, which was really spectacular and pretty emotional, with the senator's family and friends and colleagues. It is premiering November 17th to the 21st in Washington at the DC JCC. If people go to centeredfilm.com, you'll be able to see where it's coming, and we're just starting the rollout, so there'll be more to come, but that's where you can subscribe and we can keep you posted.
So eventually be available in theaters or online, or is that TBD?
Both. Yeah, we're formulating the distribution plan right now, but we're
Okay.
happy to talk about it with everyone and anyone.
Okay. I want to bring in someone else who knew Senator Lieberman quite well, and I'm particularly honored he's here, besides the fact that he's also a fan of Two Way, because Michael Graniff, what time is it in Tel Aviv?
It's 1:30 in the morning, and there's very few
1:30
people. I'd get up at this hour to be on and talk about and listen about, but definitely Joe is one of those few.
All right, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. I've just noticed that my computer is about to die, so I'm going to go get a power cord, but I'll be able to hear you. And I'd love for you to just tell people how you knew Senator Lieberman and why you think he's such an important person for everyone on here who didn't know him to know about. And I'll be right back.
Well, look, everything that Lauren and James and Jonathan have already said is exactly on target. I think about my friend Bradley Tusk, who says that 98% of elected officials are actually there to fill some deep psychic need that they didn't get enough love as a child or something like that. And then there's the 2% that are actually there because they think they can make positive change for people. And Joe is in that 2%. I used to say that back in the post 9/11 days, when it seemed as if and of course the partisanship wasn't nearly at the pitch that it is today, but I used to go around and say to people, why is it that I am forced to choose between a climate threat and a jihadist threat? I think they're both threats. And if you looked around and saw who was not just taking that sort of position, but who was actually active on both those issues, there were very few elected officials, aside from Joe, who were active and passionate about the environmental issue and about the national security issue in the way that he was. And I loved what the governor said about gentle soul with strength, how unusual that is. I think that really hits it on the mark. And what James said about knowing him 40 years, never seeing him raise his voice, never mind in politics, just in life, you just don't meet people like that, and to be in politics at the level that he was, and to be able to maintain that temperament is, I just think completely unprecedented. And I think Mark, it's particularly appropriate to be talking about him on this platform because you're trying to really, I think, follow his ethos in a way. And one of the things I think we hear a lot from your viewers is that what people are hungering for in their officials is authenticity. The thing is, sometimes you get authenticity, but you get it in a form that is not somebody that you necessarily have that temperamental steadiness as well. Similar to that line, gentle soul with strength. Joe was both authentic and, there's no English term that matches the Yiddish term match, as so many people describe him. And I'll give one example, and then I'll turn it over to others. But those of us who were around for the 2006 re-election to the Senate will recall that he lost the Democratic primary and then ultimately won re-election as an independent. And that was an extremely bruising campaign against the current governor of Connecticut, Ben Lamont. And so I have since moved to Israel, as you noted, and a couple of years ago, I got an invitation from the U.S. Embassy to an event with Ned Lamont, and I just tongue-in-cheek forwarded it to Joe, and I said somebody didn't do their research to invite me to an event with Ned Lamont. I still held a grudge over the way that he behaved in that race 16 years ago. And Joe writes back right away, as he always did, and said, "Oh, we're buddies now." And in fact, Ned was one of the speakers at his funeral. So, here I was just, a supporter and a fan, and I couldn't get over that almost 2 decades later. And Joe was buddies with him. I think that kind of encapsulates for me who he was.
Michael, I want to ask you about one other thing. I was honored to be invited to attend the memorial service in Washington a few weeks ago. And amongst the speakers was Prime Minister Netanyahu, who gave the best speech I've ever heard him give on any topic. He was in Washington. I'm not sure if he came to Washington for the address to Congress and the funeral and the memorial was scheduled that way, or they scheduled Congress for the memorial. Clarence telling me it's the first one.
No, the second one.
It was a coincidence. It was a coincidence.
Yeah.
I invited to that.
We had set up the memorial first, and then Speaker Johnson.
Yeah, very fitting. Anyway, Michael, I'd love for you to talk about, in my experience, the two groups of people on the planet who know more about American politics than Americans are Canadians and Israelis. So just talk about how Senator Lieberman was viewed in Israel, if you would.
Oh.
Well, Israelis are generally a fickle bunch. I remember, first of all, President Clinton had like 90% popularity in Israel at one point, and then Trump was much more popular in Israel than he ever was in the U.S. During his term. But then after Biden made his trip here after the horrible events of October 7th, people were so moved, and I saw he had approval ratings here that were well higher than he ever had in the U.S. So, certainly, I would say amongst those of us who pay very close attention to American politics, he was viewed both as exactly what you would want in terms of U.S.-Israel relationship policy, but also, as family. And in fact, his daughter lives here. And the last time I saw him was about 6 weeks before he passed away, was when he was here for his grandson's bar mitzvah, and invited my son and I up to Jerusalem. And my son, who is now in the Army and is 19 and is a political savant, but also has come of age in a political moment of quite a lot of cynicism. And the way that Joe encouraged him to stay active and not to get overly cynical was something I will just always treasure at the last time that I was with him.
Yeah, Michael, thank you. Stay with us. Chime back in if you want. I'll leave you unmuted. I want to show another clip, guys. This would be clip 7. So this year, in the context of Doug Emhoff, in the context of Governor Shapiro, I think there's been an unprecedented amount of discussion in America about American Jews being involved in the White House at the presidential level, vice president, first spouse, second gentleman. And again, some of you either weren't paying attention to politics or don't remember, but this conversation was fully engaged after Senator Lieberman was chosen. It was not on the early list of potential running mates for Al Gore, but as the list whittled down, he was widely considered. And this question of what would it be like to have an American Jew on a national ticket was fully engaged. So here's a little bit from Centered.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. It is crunch time for Al Gore.
Our house in the Haven was suddenly surrounded by TV satellite trucks. It was an amazing moment for me and my family.
So what kind of advice is your mother giving you on this night?
Moms are great. I'll love you no matter what happens.
Many like the idea of Lieberman running as vice president. However, some feel his religion, he's an Orthodox Jew, may hurt Gore's chances.
There was a lot of concern among Jews. The age-old concern that if you rise too high or stick your neck out, that will invite scrutiny, hostility, and will trigger a spasm of anti-Semitism.
There are elements in the country who wouldn't want to see a Jew a heartbeat away from the presidency.
But frankly, if there was any Jew we'd want to see in that position, knowing that he would do the community proud and do the country proud, it was Joe Lieberman.
Jim Kennedy, how much, from a comms point of view, was this a factor for your office, and how often did it come up, or did it not?
I don't think it came up in terms of the issue of anti-Semitism. Joe often said he didn't personally feel that affected by it, although he grew concerned about its rise around the world. He did have a strong connection, obviously, to his faith, and people in Connecticut, people of faith like myself, who was Catholic, sort of had a bond with him and he with them, and they appreciated that. So that was really a big part of his life, that connection to faith. In fact, when he became the VP nominee, his first speech on the road was to a Black church in Detroit, and he had a great connection with that community as well. I think the campaign got a little nervous about his overt religiosity, but I think he was onto something, and his expression of faith really was a motivating factor for him throughout his life.
If you want to ask questions or make comments about the film, please raise your electronic hand if you're here on the two-way platform. I'll take questions in the last 5 minutes if you want to talk about my opening monologue about where the race stands. But let's, for the next 20 minutes or 15 minutes rather, if you want to talk about the film or ask questions or talk about Senator Lieberman, please raise your hand and we'll get to you in just a minute. I want to look at clip 9, which is also about when he was being considered to be Al Gore's running mate. And I covered that. I covered him as the running mate, and it was a pleasure to cover him. He was always accessible, but also always thinking about how to communicate to and with the American people, whether it was when he was a presidential candidate in small settings, but as vice president in that swirl of anyone who selected, just a couple months on the campaign trail, and how he adapted to that whirlwind. So go ahead and play clip 9, please.
I was living my dream, which is to be a U.S. Senator. Never thought of being on a national ticket.
Now about whose stock is up and whose is down in Democrat Al Gore's search for a running mate. Gore is now said to be close to deciding.
Gore's shortlist is actually down to 4. Lieberman, an Orthodox Jew, was a model of probity and castigated President Clinton over the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
When Joe was informed that there was going to be an official vetting effort, he asked me if I would lead the team for him in dealing with the Gore campaign.
A vetting at that level it's like a colonoscopy. It is full on in everything.
All right, let's just talk a little bit about that period, and then Jacqueline will bring you in for a question. Clarin, what was he overwhelmed being on the ticket? Was it pure excitement? How'd the family feel about it? What was that phase like, where that really made a big change in his career? It elevated him from a senator to a national figure.
Absolutely. It was total excitement and honor and humbleness and an opportunity to serve in a totally different way. And so everyone was just fired up, and he was, it was funny, Jim, you probably remember, we were told that we would learn who Gore had selected by midnight, be Sunday night, midnight for Monday. And of course, we're all waking, we're all staying up, we're staying up until 1 a.m, then 2 a.m, and we don't hear anything. So, you get up the next morning and you're kind of drab and you're waiting for news. And I'll never forget, I was driving to work and I heard it on the news, and I did a wheelie in the car and turned around, went home, changed, put on a decent professional suit, because I knew we were going to be asked to introduce him to the country, and go on Greta's program. I did that one and other ones at the time. So total excitement, total commitment. I mean, he was, he took Sabbath, he recognized Sabbath, and the team worked around him. But every day was working for Al Gore, and they had become such close friends and allies on environmental issues and other issues together, that he was just honored, and he dealt with everything that way.
Yeah, Vice President Gore's speech at the memorial was also just so lovely and reflected the closeness that they have. Jim, although Al Gore did give a very gracious speech when he conceded the election to President Bush, I know that during that inter period, he had some moments of some rockiness and some confusion and anger. I know that from my reporting. How was Senator Lieberman during that period, from Election Day through the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, he was. It's interesting. There was something of a divide right after the election results. There were some people that really wanted to give up. I think they were exhausted, and some people were advising to not fight and not challenge the results. And Joe Lieberman was not one of those. He, I think, along with Al Gore himself, really wanted to at least test what happened and fight for a recount. So he was definitely on that side of the equation, and he was determined to see it through. He felt they had one, and he wanted to test that boundaries as much as legally possible, of course. So he was, very determined, along with Al Gore. Unfortunately, the party as a whole, I think, was the Republicans were hungrier, and so they had their A team out there flooding the airwaves, and we were struggling for surrogates at the time. So we were exhausted, and ultimately we didn't prevail, of course. But he was very firm about the decision to push forward and see this through. But of course, once the Supreme Court spoke, there was no follow-up to that, and that was the end, and he recognized that.
Jonathan, obviously Senator Lieberman and his family cooperated with you because they sat for interviews, and they're great. And I love the way you shot him in particular in that head-on. And we're going to look at another clip in a minute, but I'm just curious, in terms of the archival footage, the photos, because I'm kind of a student of documentary filmmaking. Did the Lieberman archives get open to you? Were there cardboard boxes stuffed with mementos that they turned over that you got to go through to produce some of those images?
Yeah, thanks to Clarin. They were kind of his mementos, I guess his documents were kind of in the Library of Congress, but not yet cataloged. So they were kind of in this limbo state where it actually worked
they were in
out.
that Raiders of the Lost Ark type situation.
Exactly. So we could access them. They weren't quite ready to go into the deep freeze. And so we just, spent such a long time combing through that, and not just the documents, which are, infused throughout the film, but there's so much material online. I mean, thank God for our taxpayer dollars with C-SPAN, because we use so much material. But he's just, again, as I said before, with his Zelig-like qualities, he's there time and again. There are so many issues that are covered in the film, but there are so many more that are not.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even get to talk about his support of the going into for the Balkan Wars. We didn't talk about his opposition to violence in video games. I mean, these are all huge things that are not covered.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is the film. Really, it's 77 minutes. It goes in. It's pretty extensive, but there's so much more about Senator Lieberman's life.
Yep. Jacqueline, question or comment about Senator Lieberman? Let me unmute you. Go ahead.
I don't know a lot about his politics because in 2000 I was just obsessed with keeping out Bush but I'm not going to go into that. What was his legacy exactly? Like, what did he actually? I'm not suggesting that he didn't do anything. I'm just suggesting I don't know what he actually got done that's relevant historically in changing this country, and that's what I wanted to know about.
Yeah, long list. Who wants to start laying it down?
I'll start first. After 9/11, he and John McCain were the first two to come out and say we needed a 9/11 commission to investigate what happened and how it could go forward. And that wasn't at the time supported by everyone. There was fear in the Bush administration that they would be criticized for what they didn't do. So there was pushback on that. And then he also came forward with this point that I think Mark mentioned about the Department of Homeland Security. All these agencies, these disparate groups that were in our enforcement community, and they weren't talking to each other. They weren't in collaboration. They were in different silos. And he pushed very hard for the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Again, there was a lot of pushback for that. And then the other piece, I'll tell you really a quick kind of insider story. when the 9/11 Commission's report came out, there was a recommendation to reform the intelligence community. And because you had CIA, FBI, you had all these different groups out there not talking to each other and not sharing information. The report came out with a recommendation to reform that. And when, long story short, Senator Daschle and Senator Frist, who were running the Senate at that time, they were hearing from all committees that they wanted to do that intel reform. Well, the two leaders decided that they were going to give it to Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins. And Senator Lieberman said to Senator Collins, let's make a pact that when we talk to the public, we are united in what we're saying about what we're doing. We're going to have our differences, and we'll talk about those behind closed doors, and we'll work on them, and we'll chew them through. But when we talk to the public, because it was so important that this get done, that we will be of one voice, and we will be moving forward on a plan together. So you had that. That's one big area of, of reform. I mean, I can go on with so many.
Jim, why don't you just add one or two if you want, and just
he had
try
a
to
long
let
record
people.
on environmental protection, starting in the 70s, frankly, and in the 80s and in the 90s. He helped fight for the Clean Air Act amendments. He helped protect the Arctic refuge from exploitation. And throughout his life, he was very devoted to environmental causes from a pragmatic point of view, but he really got a lot done on that. He also led the way for repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell as well. But there's many notable, as well as fighting for action in the Balkans, which was alluded to earlier, which was a real, bold thing for him to do at the time.
Jonathan, thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, Jonathan. I want to show, guys, it's clip 3. This is Senator Lieberman sitting in a booth in a restaurant talking to some folks. Can you just set that up? Tell people who he's talking to and
Sure.
what that scene is.
Sure, Mark. I lovingly call this scene the Connecticut cronies, and his people who worked with him and known him and really loved him, for decades. Just we kind of went through his whole career, and so that's what this is probably.
So who are the other gentlemen who are in that booth with him?
So there's Vin Morrow Jr., who's on the left. There's Senator Lieberman. There's Nick Boletto.
But who are those? Who are those guys? How do
They're
they know
all, luminaries in the Democratic Connecticut world. John Droney was the Connecticut state chairman. They're all to Connecticut.
So they're
folks,
Connecticut
all
Pauls.
legends.
Yeah,
exactly.
Pauls. All right,
Vin Morrow was the son. Vin Morrow was the son of Vinnie Morrow, who was was a confidant of Senator Lieberman in Connecticut politics before John Droney became state party chair. Vin Morrow was, and he was in an automobile accident. So that's the son of him. And these were all Democratic Party operatives that through the years, were supportive and they, they would talk about their issues with him, and he'd talk about them with them.
Yeah. All right, go ahead and let's play clip 3, please.
You don't apologize for who your friends are. I mean, not in this place. You don't apologize for who your friends are, even though you're a pain in the ass.
Well, listen, thanks. Your friendship is a blessing to me. Anyway, I love you guys, really.
We love you too, Joe.
Thanks for being a friend.
Thank you. You, kid. I go forward with a tremendous sense of gratitude for the opportunities that I've been blessed with to make a difference. As it says in Psalm 13, I will sing to the Lord, for he has treated me so kindly.
To just close, I'd love to get final reflections from all of you, and Jonathan, to remind again everybody how they can sign up and learn more about the film. I will just say, for me and for everyone I've known who's ever met Senator Lieberman, I feel so fortunate to have known him. I feel so lucky to have learned from him and to be able to be in his presence and in the aura of kindness and generosity and wisdom that he uniquely radiated for his entire life. I just feel so fortunate for that. Jim, then Clarin, then Jonathan again. Remind everybody about the film.
Yeah, the film is a great initial deep dive into his life and career. It's really a well-told story. I really recommend it to people both interested in politics as well as anyone, frankly. I hope it speaks to a new generation of people. And then beyond that, he also has a book coming out. His final book on faith and politics is coming out in October, and that's another thing to look forward to as part of his legacy. And I hope that makes an impact in this very polarized and divided world. Both the book and the film, I think, speak to an alternate course, which gets to the notion of grace, which, Mark, you often speak of.
Yeah.
Thank you. Clarin.
Yeah. And, you know, when he agreed to do the film, he also wanted there to be a curriculum for civics education in high schools that would be used in concert with the film in high schools. And so that is also being created as we speak, because there's not enough civics education on democracy, the branches of government, how to get along, civil discourse, talking about the facts, and you know, those kinds of things. He was really, really concerned that we weren't doing enough in all of that vein.
Okay. One more time, Jonathan, tell folks if they're interested in the film, what they can do to see more than they saw tonight here.
Sure. It's centeredfilm.com, and that you can sign up. We'll keep you posted. November 17th, there's a 5-night run in Washington, D.C. That information is on the website. And I'm just grateful that, you know, he was a part of my life for a short period of time. I'll just say something very quickly, how he impacted us in the crew. We were filming outside the bar where those folks were, the Connecticut operatives, and my cameraman almost got run over by a car, and he wanted to just start yelling and screaming and cursing at the person, the driver, and he thought, "Where's Joe? Joe wouldn't respond that way." So he influenced us in ways big and small, and just wish we could have gone on tour together with the film. But anyway, we've got the film.
Yeah. If you knew Senator Lieberman, I strongly recommend you watch the film. It will bring back great memories and will remind you of his greatness. And if you didn't know him, as Jim suggested, it's an opportunity for a whole nother group of you, particularly if you're younger, to understand what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a good person, and what it means to put country above party, as his friend John McCain did throughout their partnership. And Megan couldn't be here tonight, but if you're familiar with Senator McCain and his brand of politics, but less familiar with Senator Lieberman, I'd urge you to seek out the film and watch it. And as Jim said, the book next month. Very grateful to you all for coming tonight, and Jonathan for sharing the film with us and with the community here. And we'll as always, you'll be able to watch this again and share this on YouTube in just a few minutes after we conclude. If you want to ask questions about my reporting and analysis, come to the morning meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. I don't want to pivot to that now, but Sean Spicer and Tim Hogan and I will be live at 9 a.m. tomorrow on YouTube and on Two-Way, and we'll talk all about that stuff, and you can ask your questions then. So again, thanks Governor McCrory, thanks to everybody who was part of this, and you three, and thanks to the Lieberman family for sharing with us such an incredible person. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Mark. Mm-hmm.